Welcome to the Atheist Podcast. I'm Erin.
And I'm Kelley. Atheist is where we will explore American cultural trends through the lenses of a devout theist
and a devout atheist. We will discuss the messiness of being human,
the latest in social science, psychology, and American culture,
and what any of it has to do with Homo sapiens' longtime preoccupation with religion.
Hey, Erin.
Hey, Kelley.
Oh my gosh. Did you even realize all the stuff that your aunt has done in her life?
I did not. I did not know so much, actually, of what we got into with her on that episode. So, I had billed her as, women's rights advocate, gay rights advocate in the church, but I really didn't know sort of the role that she played as the sex abuse scandal in the Catholic Church had unfolded. I was not aware of, as kind of in her position, how involved she was, from a media presence sort of standpoint, and then sounds like working with survivors, and
Amazing.
I did not know all that. And then I knew she was an attorney, but I didn't kind of realized the role of prominence that she played in the state attorney's office for the years that she was there. And, it was...
And not just like any state attorney's office, but like the city of Chicago, like DuPage County, which is one of the busiest, criminal court systems, in the country.
Yeah. So
big.
I know. So it's like I grew up. I was just joking off air, but it's like, it's like my cousin's mom, my dad's sister, and we would always talk about, her and my uncle. They have just traveled extensively and have been all over the world, and they're always doing something interesting. They like to travel to film festivals and see all the upcoming movies that are going to be potentially on the Academy Awards circuit and that kind of thing. So, typically we're like, talk about your travels and talk about what films you've seen, and then talk about what the kids are up to. We didn't talk as much about all of her
and this stuff was
life.
also kind of, this was also stuff that was happening 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
20 years ago, you were how old?
16, 17.
Yeah. So
I would just have been like, hey, what are my friends up to? I'm going to go to...
Right. Meanwhile, my aunt is...
out kicking ass.
Yeah. And so for her to kind of be in high school during Vatican II and be kind of really like awakened at such an early age to this huge shift in the Catholic Church, and then in the at this height of her career and the volunteerism that she did through the Catholic Church and the activism that she did, then for the sexual abuse scandal to come, it's just she was just in these kind of prime historic points of time,
pivotal moments.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy. And it's funny because we asked her after we had finished the interview if she knew a couple of my friends who were reporters in Chicago, because I figured she probably, because one was a court reporter, crime reporter, and another is a religion reporter. And my friend Kathy, who's like my best friend, my longest and oldest best friend, she remembered her.
Yeah.
So I texted Kathy and I was like, Kathy, we just interviewed, Linda. And Kathy immediately was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I totally remember her. She was a vanguard, And it was so funny because as we were talking to your aunt, she's just like this sweet, funny, lady that you would never guess was like kicking ass and taking names. Is that the phrase?
Yeah, when she was talking about wiping the floor or whatever with Bill Donahue.
Yes.
It was so funny.
Yes.
But she's got that prosecutorial, which is why they made her the president. It sounds like, part of it was because she was able to be good at presenting and speaking and
making arguments for the the work they were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I loved also just what she said about this that this was not work she chose to do. That was work that she was chosen to do, and that she just followed her yes.
Yeah.
That this authentic kind of organic yes to kind of bring
Yeah.
her into that place.
Yeah. Yeah. That was something that really resonated with me because I'm often that's kind of like one of my tendencies or
Yeah.
philosophical beliefs is I tend to say yes to things.
Yeah.
When opportunity comes calling, you're like, all right, why
Yeah.
not?
Yeah. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
and she did, and it opened a lot of doors to a lot of interesting life event. Yeah.
Relationships
Yeah.
and her being able to really, I'm sure she saved a lot of lives.
Yeah.
She said that, I'm sure that the organization saved a lot of lives.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting what she said about that organization now, that a lot of young people have left the church who were like a lot of young gay people have left the church, but that what it's there now for is for people who are still in the church, who are coming out and not knowing where to go.
Yeah, that are conservative or from like conservative. I mean, that was me, right?
Yeah.
Like that was kind of where I was in a more rural red state conservative area. And yeah, I mean, I do remember like because I feel like if as I recall and also hearing her describe it too, like I think when I came out, I think it was like a year maybe before my parents like really started talking about it with other people. And so that's why she made the comment that like, oh, if you had told me, like I would have had all these resources, right? So but I do remember her like sharing those resources and like feeling comforted by that, It was like
But it also sounds like she also was not like, oh, I'm in this organization, I'm doing this thing, and oh, my niece is gay, and now I have to like make sure that my niece understands that the church,
yeah, no,
like she didn't try to, she didn't try to change who you were to kind of fit.
No. And I think, I mean, even, you kind of heard her talking about her own kids and her own journey, right? Like, just, I think, she'd kept kind of on that journey of, I'm not this is not something that this is not something I want to be a part of anymore, you know?
Well, right. And I was going to ask you, how did that feel to hear her say that? Like, that she was already kind of, that this work had, had been really disillusioning for her from the church, for a while. But then when you came out, she was like, I'm done. It sounded to me like that was kind of the...
Yeah.
Like
I don't know. I guess I never really... I don't know that I knew that, like that was as pivotal of a moment, or if it was just more of like the straw that broke the camel's back, right? Like it's like all these things that have been piling up, and you're like, all right, I can't do this anymore. But yeah, I mean, that's to be a part of an organization that you're like really you're in and you're fighting to change, and then to eventually you have to kind of like have this resolution where you're like, all right, I've done all that I can. That
I
really
gotta let it go.
That really resonated with me, because that's a tendency that I have is like, and I'm part of an organization, I'm like, how do we make it better? And it's frustrating to be a part of an organization that you're like,
it's just broken.
Yeah.
And knowing when that moment is, like, when do I have to leave? In the evangelical church, there's a huge movement. There has been a huge movement probably in the last, I don't know, maybe 8 to 10 years, called like what people are calling deconstruction, right? Like the deconstruction movement, where people are leaving faith, leaving the church, and sometimes with the intent of just leaving. But deconstruction, more than just leaving, is kind of saying, I'm gonna break this apart and look at these parts. Look at the parts that are broken, throw away the parts that don't serve me or that I think are heretical, really, to what I think the original teaching is.
Yeah.
And I'm going to reconstruct something that serves me and not just me, but serves the world and the community in a healthier way. But sometimes people don't get to that reconstruction phase. Sometimes people are just like, and I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's valid too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting way to put it. I hadn't really thought of it that way. It was cool. One of the other things that I really enjoyed about that was the amount of things that the two of you had in common.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm just here listening, you know? But just so many references and authors and scholars that you both like really knew and had an understanding of. And I'm like, I'm out here, I don't know what's going on, but I'm loving that the two of you know what's going on.
That we're jiving. Yeah. Well, like when you asked me in our first episode, like, who are some of those feminist scholars? And I was like, I'm like, well, there's Rosemary Ruther, but then the other one she said, Fiorenza, this woman, like her name's really complicated. And so I had her in my mind, but I was like, I can't think of her name. Yeah. And then she was like, oh yeah, these women who I like knew through this organization and they were my friends. And and I was like, what? Are you kidding me? Like these women changed like the face of theology. Yeah. Like they were groundbreaking. So she was just like in it.
Yeah. Yeah. She was in it, and like apparently doing interviews with Sean Hannity, which was pretty funny. That reference. But yeah, just like, oh, I was on CNN and Fox and MSNBC. I'm like, what? I mean, I knew that she had done the episode of Crossfire, and I knew that she had been on PBS, because I remember my parents telling me that, but I don't remember ever watching any of her appearances on TV. It's pretty cool. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, I mean, she was definitely in it, and I love the fact too that, well, even like when she was talking about, like, she referenced Teilhard de Chardin like so early, and in kind of her evolving understanding of who God is now. And so the fact that, she read Teilhard in high school at Rosati Kane, and that she had all these radical nuns, and that they taught her to question, and, that's what I'm talking about too, with like, man, we did not have that equivalency, and we did not have that in Protestant. I mean, maybe in mainline Protestant churches, but certainly not in like Calvinist evangelical spaces did we have feminist women, teaching us to question at all.
Yeah, yeah, and promoting our trajectory, right? Yeah. Like, or for her,
yes,
because that's a bit of, I mean, for the family lore in our the story that I had always heard growing up was like that, my aunt was just this brilliant student, and so she was able to, and now having heard her kind of recounted, it was probably from the time that she was in elementary school that her teachers recognized her aptitude, and she got a scholarship to go to Rosati Kane, because my grandparents did not have a lot of money, and they were, they had 4 kids that they were trying to, raise on. My grandfather was like a telephone stringer, and and so she was a great student, so she got the scholarship to Rosati Kane, and then eventually got a scholarship to DePaul and became an attorney. And but it sounds like in kind of each of those transition moments,
Yeah.
it was like these women, nuns or
Yeah.
teachers that she had that were like, hey, this is the path that you need to try to go down, and kind of helped
Yeah.
her down that path.
And even like, I wanted to go back and ask her about the priest who, when she was at DePaul, who brought in like a lesbian couple. I was like, really? Like that was, I was like, that was pretty radical.
Yeah.
Like, here's a lesbian couple. Like, did he have a pointer? He was like,
no, yeah, and that was, that was.
But then they just talked and they said, yeah, this is like, and this is how like we can have a family, and this is, I mean,
yeah, that is, and I mean, yeah, that in the time period that would have been totally radical
at a Jesuit university.
Yeah,
I think
DePaul
is Jesuit.
It's definitely religious.
It's definitely Catholic. I think it's Jesuit. Yeah. Pretty sure.
Yeah. And then I liked when she was talking about the baby shower, and it's just it was so clear, like it was just her first experience ever being like, oh,
in
this is different
with people who are not like her.
Yeah.
It was really sweet. Really sweet. So when she started talking about the abuse scandal, and when she made reference to the fact that that there are these secrets, right? That the priests have secrets, that some of the priests have girlfriends, some of the priests are gay, and some of the priests are pedophiles. And notice the gay and the pedophiles were not, right? That's not a combination, right? But that kind of everybody was kind of keeping everybody's secrets.
Yeah.
That was, I mean, even now, I feel like that's still a little shocking to hear, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's what the scholar that she mentioned that was in the Spotlight movie, Richard Fife, I think is the right name. That was because he had left the priesthood, was a psychologist. I think his wife was a nun that had left.
Oh yeah.
And but yeah, that was like the data that he sort of that he collected, and that then the reporters who were working for the Boston Globe, when they first were researching the story, were like, once they got the numbers from him, they started to do the math, and then they were like, oh, there's a lot more than we know about, right? And that's when they went back and they started using the records to be like who had been moved.
Yeah. Do you remember that moment in that movie when they realized the extent of the abuse?
Yeah.
It's just like shocking.
Yeah. That kind of journalism is it's incredibly expensive, and it's incredibly rare for people to do that. Because the Spotlight unit, they would...
Is that the Boston Globe?
And they would... So it was like the investigative journalism unit at the Boston Globe.
Yeah.
And so it was a team of reporters that would spend months, sometimes years, researching and reporting on a story before they would publish it. Like that just doesn't happen now. The idea that you would pay someone for a couple of years working and
on
not
one story,
and that they wouldn't publish anything would just be unheard of. So
now for sure today, right?
I think Spotlight still exists. I don't know what the financial shape that the Boston Globe is in. I mean, all the newspapers, with the exception of the New York Times, and I think the Wall Street Journal is doing okay, but everybody else is like really, really struggling.
Think about like how important that was.
Yeah,
And if you don't invest in that kind of journalism,
yeah,
you know, what kind of atrocities continue because they're just not discovered?
yeah, yeah.
Because nobody's, doing, because who investigates?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciated also what she was saying too about, and you and I kind of talked a little bit about this after, just what she was talking about in terms of the balance of feminine and masculine,
Mm-hmm.
and that she was talking about how, I think what she was saying was like in the affinity groups through the LGBT organization, that even in those kind of affinity groups where there's like all men or all women,
Mm-hmm.
that they would struggle sometimes because they wouldn't have that other viewpoint.
Yeah.
So even like the men, even though this is a group of gay men,
Yeah.
that they struggled then when women would come into the group or would be introduced to the group, because they just didn't have that feminine perspective to kind of work through.
Right.
And I was talking to a friend the other day, and we were talking about how with a lot of the young priests coming in, and a lot of the young priests coming in, you can imagine, are on the conservative side, because a lot of probably progressive people
aren't not going into the priesthood.
No.
Yeah.
So most of them are pretty conservative, and when you're entering into that space, and you're taking a vow of celibacy, and so you're not going to get married, you're not going to have children, you're going to be a part of this organization, there's nothing to run up against, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's conflict. I'm sure there's conflict within, the brotherhood and all that.
Yeah.
I'm sure of it, but not the kind that you're getting kind of in the world. And she had mentioned this idea of like that growth was stopped. Like there was like this kind of stunted growth when people entered the priesthood.
So I didn't realize that people enter the priesthood so young.
Well, I mean,
it just depends.
It
Or maybe
depends.
it used to be that way, and maybe it's not as much anymore. I don't really know.
I mean, it used to be like people would just enter kind of seminary, like in like high school, college. It was that they called it that. And then most people did not go into the priesthood. Like, I know, and it's particularly like here in St. Louis, I know there was a lot of that. But now I think like when I was at Aquinas, the young priests were, I think they were college students or post grad.
Yeah.
So at least they've had they're a little older, but still like
yeah.
If you're an undergrad, we know your brain is not all the way developed.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I'm curious that we didn't ask her this. Curious if she would think that. Well, she did say she thinks that they would have gay priests before female priests, but we already know there are gay priests, right?
Yeah.
But I wonder if the Catholic Church would have married priests before female priests.
Oh,
if they would, if they would take
give
away
on that,
give on the celibacy.
I mean, it seems like it would be wise. You have to think that I mean, at least I don't know. I know a few people who thought about being priests and then didn't because they wanted to get married or fell in love, and like. It's and they would have been good, and so you would think that you probably do, because it's just like human nature to want to fall in love, like, and
of course,
and be in a relationship. So, I think, you would lose so many good candidates that you could have.
Like I just feel like there's got to be a time that gives.
Yeah.
Like, I just think that's got to give first
Yeah.
before probably women. Not that I think that should give before women, but
Yeah.
I just think logically in the organization that probably will. I don't know. Okay, so Justin just said that there is that John Paul II, 1980, passed a resolution that Episcopal. I wonder if it was just Episcopal. It says just Episcopal priests who were married, if they converted to Catholicism, they could obviously stay married. They weren't going to make them divorce their wives, and so you could convert. And so there are approximately like 120 married priests in the Catholic Church. So because there's the precedent, you would think,
Yeah.
that
would, maybe open a door there.
Yeah.
It seems like there would have to be quite a bit of change in order to sort of, regain all that has been lost in the last few decades.
Yeah. And and the sad thing is we have the most progressive pope there has ever been.
Yeah.
Right now. And it's just, and he's making changes, and it would be great if there was, if we could feel that a little bit more in the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that I was going to mention about the feminist theology and this new, this woman who, her name is Libby Schrader.
Okay.
Elizabeth Schrader, and she just she went to Duke, and I don't know if she just got her.
This is the Mary Magdalene.
This is the Mary Magdalene stuff.
Yes. Okay.
And so this is super interesting in terms of how Mary Magdalene has been kind of maligned, and how feminists now having just feminist theologians and also having scripture digitized. And so now you can actually look at all these like primary source material at one time instead of like traveling to all these different countries and going into libraries and to small dark rooms looking through these things. Now you can see all these things digitized. And this woman, Libby Schrader, she was doing her studies on Mary Magdalene, and she was specifically looking at the text around the Lazarus and raising Lazarus from the dead, and his sisters, Mary and Martha. Okay. Now, Mary and Martha, this is not Mary Magdalene, but what she found was that in most of the primary source material around this document, that Martha is actually added, that it's just Mary that is spoken about in this story, and that because Maria and Martha is just basically changing one iota, the I of Maria into a theta. So Maria becomes Martha, right? If you can kind of picture it in Greek. So, and in it, it says like sister, and then they added an S. So they even have like, I don't even know if it's like a little caret, and then they add like Martha. But anyway, so a lot of the text has been changed. And so what her thesis was about is that because in that text, when Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, this is his like penultimate miracle before he himself is raised from the dead. Yeah. And here are these two women that send for Jesus to come and save their brother. And he waits 4 days, he comes, and meanwhile, Mary goes and gathers a crowd of witnesses to watch because she's so sure that Jesus is going to save him. And then Martha says to, we can hear our children downstairs, both of them. Martha, Jesus says to Martha, you know, I am the way, the truth, and do you believe that I am, who I am? And she says, I know who you are. You are the Son of God. And so she makes this kind of messianic claim and says that Jesus is the Messiah, which is big, right? Which is huge. There are not many people who do that in Scripture. And Peter is one of them. And Peter is, one of, on whom I will build the church.
Mm-hmm.
And then Martha in this scripture is one. Now, if Martha is actually added to this, then what that says is that Mary, as the kind of the lone sister, has done all these things, that she had this huge role, that she had this messianic claim, like that she states that Jesus is the Messiah, that and in doing so, then she becomes this huge role, this huge player, right, in this story. And there's even some like early theologians and like of the early church, that when they talk about that text, they talk about it being Mary. They don't even refer to Martha in it. So they wonder, oh, well, maybe Martha wasn't in that person, and that gospel. So the big deal about this is that that Mary, that was Lazarus's brother, then there's also text that says that Mary was actually Mary Magdalene. So if that was Mary Magdalene, and it's not, there's another scripture where there is a sisters, Mary and Martha of Bethany, and those are different. That's different. Those are different people.
Okay.
But if Lazarus' sister was Mary Magdalene, and she had that kind of a role in Lazarus being raised from the tomb, in the messianic claim, and then also when Jesus was, raised from, that makes her huge, right? And then there's also the gospel according to Mary Magdalene, which we've lost a lot of it, but there are parts of it that are still that are readable and that people have studied, and what the gist of it is basically is that there is a rift after Jesus dies. It's written after Jesus died. Well, all of the Gospels are written after Jesus died, right? But it's what she's writing about is time after,
right?
And that there's a rift between the disciples, between the faction of Peter and the faction of Mary, and that there are these kind of two lineages that kind of come down. One being kind of the more masculine through Peter, through like, I'm going to raise up a church and you are going to make disciples of men, right? You are going to spread my word. And then Mary's kind of lineage, which is much more feminine, which is much more contemplative in like what your aunt was talking about in terms of like the spirit, right? That the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, is the feminine, and that there's an indwelling of God. And so for Peter, it was about the church, it was about proclaiming the gospel, and for Mary, it was about cultivating the Spirit of God within. And so you can see why also the church might have an interest in not just because of patriarchy, but because if they want to raise up the values of the church, right, that they would raise up Peter and denigrate Mary. So there's so much that, and these things are there, and like in the text and in these original, when these things have been kind of transcribed. But now that you're finally having women kind of look at these things and you're having them look at them all at once, now we can start seeing patterns that basically old white men have never bothered to see, or just haven't seen, because it's just not in their interest, really.
Right.
Or in their bias structure, right? And so I think that there's all kinds of, and Father Jim Martin, who's also a huge LGBT proponent in the Catholic Church. He just wrote a book on Lazarus, and I messaged him actually on Instagram, and I was like, did you have Libby Schrader's research in there? And he goes, yep, it's in there.
Yeah.
So I got to buy that book and see. But so really, like when I talk about this, like I start getting teary, because to me, this is like 2,000 years of silence, of women being silenced.
Yeah.
And so when you start looking at some of this research and some of these women coming out and making these huge, huge discoveries and claims, it's going to change the trajectory, and it's going to make a huge difference, if not in our lifetime, in our daughters' lifetimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's big.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
You know a lot about this.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I don't know if I'm like saying it all correctly, and there's lots of stuff, but I mean, I definitely bought her. Like her master's thesis was published in the Harvard
seminary or
religion journal, the Harvard Journal of Religion, which is like
the
big,
the one, yeah,
the one, and I went and bought it, and so I have like all 28 pages of it, and I didn't understand all of it, but man, I mean, it's like it's there, it's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
It's pretty cool stuff.
That's very cool. Well, you've got all these women making a difference, right?
Yeah,
it's pretty cool.
It's really cool. So, yeah, if any of our listeners know of any other women because we haven't had a ton of women
on the show, yeah.
Have we even had any?
Betty.
We had Betty, yeah. So Betty and your aunt.
Mm-hmm.
But we'd love to have more women to interview and to talk about these things, whether it's in religious studies or whether it's, in social science and psychology and, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah. If you know people or, anybody that you think would be good for the show, please get in touch. You can reach out to us on our email, through our Instagram, Substacks. I mean, you know how to find us, right? We're available. LinkedIn. I don't know. So please contact us if you
or if you have a story, you yourself have a story that that you think is
worth sharing or talking about. Yeah, if you've got
which I'm sure all of you do,
an area of expertise that you'd like to talk to us about, we'd love to have you.
Yeah.
So.
Well, this was really exciting.
Yeah, it was fun. It was really cool for me too to just get to learn more about my family. So
how cool!
Yeah,
how cool. Well, till next time, Erin.
Yeah. We'll go start researching our next theme.
Yeah. We are always appreciative of our listeners. Thank you so much for listening. We do have a favor to ask, though. If you're liking Atheist, and clearly you are, please share it with a few friends. We're looking to grow a lot in 2024. More topics, more interviews, more episodes in general. But we need your help to make that happen.
We are not asking you to contribute any money, just a few minutes of your time to share this episode, maybe on a social media post, or better yet, while you're visiting with a friend. Every new listener really helps us out. If you have any topic suggestions, questions, or thoughts on the show, feel free to write us at atheist@stlpodcast.com.
Atheist is produced by Justin Sywell and Trend Media STL. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at STL Podcasts.
Thank you for listening, and keep looking for connection.